All right, today we're going to be looking at this new design that I made for a custom home. And we're here on Twinmotion, which is the program where we're going to add the landscape, we're going to add the materials. This is the most fun part for me of the whole experience, beside designing, of course. But before we get into that part, let's talk a little bit about the design, why it looks the way that it does, and a little bit about the process, about how it became that from an idea. So since I'm doing these designs as exercises just for fun, for creativity, as I've said before, the process of designing is a little bit different. I'm not designing the interior, and I get a lot of questions as to why I don't design the interior of these houses. And I just want to mention that when you design the exterior and the interior of a space, it takes a very long time. These type of designs that I'm doing, they're like packages, meaning they're not all over the place. They pretty much come from one single shape that's altered in a specific way. And what that does is that it makes modeling the exterior a little bit easier. And so I'm able to do these designs in like 2 or 3 days. Whereas if I was doing the interior and the exterior, I could spend weeks doing these. And so you guys wouldn't have any videos from me for weeks to even a month. And even though I love the interiors, I think the interior of a building is one of my favorite portions, even more than the exterior sometimes, just because the interior is where you spend your time at, right? I have chosen to, at least for now, make these designs of the exterior only. So maybe in the future what you'll see me do is grab some of these models and make the interior of them, or make a portion of the interior. That's totally possible, something I might do in the future. But for now, I'm just going to be focusing on the exterior of these buildings. And so with this design, I just had the idea for a shape in my head. And so I drew that shape in what seems to be a section. And you can see this portion right here. This is actually the roof. These would be the walls or glass, and this is a floor slab. And so I'm not really thinking about material. I'm just thinking about the overall composition of the shape. And so I never really knew what I was doing here. So this is not an exercise of form follows function. It's more like form looks for function, because that's what I end up doing. And so I don't want you to think this is the only way to design architecture, or the only way that I do it, but this is just one of the methods of design that I use, especially when I'm doing these creative designs. Anyway, so I was really intrigued by this shape here, and I thought about it in both this elevation or section and this elevation. So I have this short section here and this longer elevation here. And then I start to think about it in plan, and you can see that it's very simple in plan. And so if I were to enter here, I would like this central axis to be aligned with this portion here, whatever this may be. And if I were to zoom in, you could see that there's 2 lines that I drew, and I was thinking maybe that could be like a clerestory window or something that would allow light to come in from the roof. But I definitely wanted that to create an access point below, and so I would be able to align program. And again, I'm not going to design the interior, but I always think about the interior, almost model it in my head as I'm making these designs. So I knew that whatever program I would design, the possibility would probably be that my circulation would be here, aligned with this portion here, and all the other program would be on the sides. And so I draw some very preliminary axonometrics or perspectives, whatever you want to call them. But that to me was looking kind of boring, you see, because this is totally interesting, but this is very boring, and this is kind of boring. This is okay, but it's not there yet. And so I started thinking about it more in section, and I'm like, well, what I could do is that I can have this central axis here. I can make this a 2-story building or a 2-story house, and have this central axis, the entrance, turn into stairs, and then that would be the bottom portion of the house, and this would be the private, and this would be the semi-public or semi-private area of the house. And then this is when I started to feel more confident in the design, and then I drew basically this all over again, but using this new idea that I would design the house looking like this. And then I thought about the skin of the house, and I like my designs not to be all over the place. Like I said, I like them to be almost like packages, like it's one single composition that I carve out of to create basically like almost like a sculpture in a way. So my designs tend to be kind of sculptural, especially these fun exercises, or they tend to be a little sculptural, and that's okay. And so I imagined, you know, how I said right here, I would have clerestory windows. I imagined that clerestory actually, that profile going all the way on this plane, which is the roof, and then extending throughout onto the wall, and then I would repeat that. Remember, I tend to always have obtuse and acute angles and repetition in my designs. It's just something that I enjoy seeing and I enjoy making. And so this is a really bad section here, but the idea was just to remind myself that I wanted some sort of clerestory opening, some sort of glass, and I wanted to have a separation between the interior and the exterior of the materials. And you can see in all my sketches that I tend to focus mostly on the backside, which is this portion here, or this portion here. But I wasn't really paying attention to the front, to the entrance of the house. And so I made this sketch here of what that could look like, and I began to play with the plane. So it wouldn't be like this facade. You see this facade is really flat and two-dimensional. And I wanted this facade, which is this portion here, I wanted this to be more three-dimensional. And then a very quick diagram that I made of the plans, what they would look like. Basically, this is the second floor. So this would be this top portion here. It's the ground level. I know it's really confusing. But I could have called this actually the first floor, and then this the basement, for example. So let's just, instead of second floor, let's just refer to this as the first floor, or the ground level. So the ground level, you would enter the house through here, and there would be some stairs that you can go immediately down into this space here, which is that sub level. And once you come down, you have one room to the left, one room to the right, and then you have the master here. And this could be subdivided. Either of these could be subdivided into more rooms depending on how large this volume is. And so what that does is that when I enter this house, I have stairs that lead down to the rooms, but at the same time, I have this visual connection with this facade here. And since it's probably going to be glass, it allows me to see through onto whatever the landscape is. And it allows me to keep that separation of program, just like I mentioned in this diagram, where I wanted to have circulation in the center and then program on the right and left. So then I could have kitchen, dining, living, so on and so forth. And I already went over the ground level. And so I called it generator house, just because to me it looked like a generator. I don't struggle too much with thinking about what I'm going to name these houses. I try not to take any time on naming these houses. So whatever comes to my mind at the moment, kind of like an ink blot test, that's the first thing that I name it. So this is my generator house. It looks more like an engine, but it's going to be my generator house. And so we get into the next stage, which is actually modeling the house. Now, I enjoy and I don't enjoy modeling. I enjoy it because it's how I start to develop some of these concepts that I have in my mind. I'm able to see them more clear as I start to model them, but modeling is not one of my favorite things to do. I enjoy doing it, but I don't hate it at all, or I don't dislike it. But if I were to put it in order, my favorite thing to do is design, then I'd like to render or add materials and do that, you know, illustrations basically. And then after that, the third thing would be modeling. And so what you're looking at here is just the beginning stages of the entrance of the house and that exterior portion of the house, and landscape would exist between these two spaces. So now the entrance of the house is starting to take more shape. I've covered this bottom area here because that's not going to be glazing, that's actually going to be earth. And I've added glazing to the entrance of the house, the entrance portion of the house. And so the door is going to go somewhere around here. Next, I began to carve out those spaces where the glazing, the openings, the windows are going to go. And you'll see that they extend from the ground all the way to the top. And I've added those same clerestory openings over here to this channel that exists. Now, to create some sort of interesting shadow patterns on the interior of the house, but also to liven up the exterior of the house, I've added these horizontal members, these round members that match this balcony railing that exists on this facade. And so, like I mentioned, that's for shadow and for shade. And so this facade was looking way too plain for my taste. And so what I decided to do is I decided to create these secondary shading elements that would go around these louvers and tie them together as basically one single element. As I always mention, I'm always thinking about the interior as I'm making the exterior. And so I want you to ignore these things here because my models are not going to be perfect all throughout. Because I'm only gonna perfect whatever you're gonna see. And so what I made is this section here, just so you could have an idea that this would be the steps that lead up from the front driveway of the house up to the entrance. And then probably somewhere here you would have the stairs that begin to go down into the spaces that are gonna be the rooms and the master. And then up here you would have your kitchen and your dining and all the other spaces and this exterior balcony. And you can start to imagine what that interior space would feel like. It'd feel really cool to be in there and really nice, and you'd get some nice views, but also the space would feel great. And finally, we arrive at a finished model. This is a perspective of what it looks like to get to the front door of the house. The model is gotten to a point where it's not 100% complete, but it looks good enough to render. So now let's go into Twinmotion, the real fun part. So here we are on Twinmotion, and the first thing we're going to do is delete this floor, and we're going to replace it with some landscape. And now I'm going to start manipulating the landscape, but first let's go ahead and save this file. All right, so now we have the immediate environment around it pretty nicely molded to the building itself. And so let's start putting some basic trees, and then after that we'll get into the materials. And so right now, as you can see, I'm just trying to create like this tropical rainforest slash jungle type of area. And I'm trying to really make this environment really seem realistic. So I'm trying to add different types of different variety of plants and trees, and really make it look like a jungle. And so I want to make sure that I capture some views first, just so I don't start blocking them with trees. Then I could just periodically check back on them and see how they're doing. So I won't edit them, but I'm gonna go ahead and save some of these some images just so that I can have them and start working on them as we move along. And maybe a shot like this would be pretty cool. We definitely want a shot from here, and we'll adjust it later. We'll decide what height we set them at. These are just placeholders. We could do one from this side as well. And I accidentally just framed the view with these two palm trees. That wasn't intended at all. Maybe one from here. I also want to point out two things from this design. One, I should have articulated the roof a little bit more, and I noticed that halfway through the design, but I didn't want to go back into Rhino and redo everything I had done, because this is just a fun exercise. It's not meant to be any real work of architecture, so I just left it the way that it is. But in real life, I probably would have made or not in real life, but for a client or for an actual build design, I would have probably angled this roof this way and the other one the other way. Or the opposite, I would have actually made this point higher so that the water could channel in. And I'll get into that in a little bit, what exactly this channel is. We'll get into that in a bit. But the second thing I wanted to mention is this is just something that kind of happened by accident, but it kind of looks like this roof where the openings are, it kind of looks like these two elements here actually were in the building, but then when you pull them out, you have this opening here. So it almost looks like they were pulled out, you know, like shifting planes pretty much. That's the effect that it has, even though that's not what was intended at all. It was a happy coincidence. All right, so I've really taken my time to detail this one single shot, and now I'm gonna move on to the others, detail them, and after I've finished, I'm gonna go ahead and put some materials. But one thing that I want to point out is that these butterflies, for some reason, Twinmotion calls them flying butter, and I think it's so hilarious. They tend to have a weird sense of humor. All right, so I've created my little jungle here, and my computer's crashed 3 times. Well, not the computer, but the program Twinmotion has crashed 3 times, and I've lost probably in total around 30 minutes of work because I don't save often. So what I did is that I went to the preferences and I made it save every 5 minutes just so that doesn't happen. And the reason it happened is not my computer, it's just that I work really messy. I tend to work really messy sometimes, and then I organize myself as I go. But that wasn't working for Twinmotion and for this scene because it's just so heavy, so full of grass and detail. And you'll see in the renderings, like I can't wait for you guys to see it. But just organizing things and turning things off as I was working on other parts really helped so that it wouldn't crash again. But finally, we've gotten to the stage which probably is going to take the longest, and that's deciding what material we want to use. Now, when using materials, it's really important that you use context as a guide. And what I mean by that is what's around your building can really influence what your building is going to look like at the end. And that doesn't mean that we have to match what our surroundings are. It's okay to create a contrast, but as long as you're aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it, that's going to make your design at the end stronger. And so these designs are not meant to make masterpieces. They're more meant to experiment. So sometimes I will experiment with materials that I don't think look great, but I just want to set something in stone and just render it. But I think that we're going to go with something more calm here. We're probably going to use the palette. So we're not going to create a contrast. We're actually going to go ahead and try to create a cohesive design that blends into the landscape. And that's going to be the concept for the material palette that we're going to choose. So we're probably going to use wood. We're probably going to use stone, maybe some concrete, very natural looking materials. We might create a small contrast, but I don't think we're going to be using metal. The only way that I would be using metal now is if it was some really weathered copper. I know I love copper, it's one of my favorite materials, but if we were able, I don't think Twinmotion gives me that ability, but if we were able to get the type of copper that that has started to turn green and has started to corrode, I think that would make a very beautiful contrast to the surrounding. It would make the building look like it's being almost consumed by the environment, or it's aged along with the environment, and that's something that I think would look nice. But since I don't think Twinmotion is going to allow me to do that, and look, there's a floating tree here, but that's okay because I've organized everything according to my shots, so I'm not going to shoot anything outside, so you won't see that tree floating like that. But basically, we're just going to try, it might change of course, but we might go with a very natural palette. All right, so I found this material. It's a type of stone. I'm not gonna finalize it yet because this is only the first material that I went with. I think that the color, it blends beautifully with the surrounding environment, so it looks very nice. But I've laid out some of the materials here, and what I want to show you actually is the inside of the house. Even though I'm not going to render the inside, I want to show you what the interior space looks like. So let me quit this media mode and let me close this so that this opens up a little bit more. But yeah, that's what the inside of the space looks like. So it feels a little out of scale, and we have some rogue grass there. Feels a little out of scale just because we don't have furniture, or not out of scale, but it's hard to tell what the scale is because there's no furniture, there's no people, nothing like that, but that's completely okay. But I just want you to look at the space and what I was talking about before. So the idea is that when you enter this door, this area here, that's the ceiling, it completely creates an axis that leads you to the back, and there would be a view, of course, or maybe that would be nice enough on its own, but this view is not going to be, rendered, so that's why I'm not going to manipulate the land there. There'd be some point of interest that you can probably visually connect with as soon as you enter the space. And then somewhere around here, you'd have stairs that lead downstairs, obviously. Well, I mean, you could go upstairs, and this is not going to be messed with at all, but this would be where we have room 1, master, and then room 2. But going back upstairs, I just want to point a few things out. One is that it feels nice, feels like a nice space. Even though the outside may not look like a home, I believe that the inside has the potential to feel like a home. And if you were able to keep this open plan without partitions that go all the way to the ceiling, it'd be a very nice experience, and all the trees would add a lot of shading. And so overall, the space feels nice. And then something that I wanted to show you, I mentioned this before, it was kind of like a little surprise in a way. What was the point of this channel to begin with? And this channel here, at first it was just a design element that would serve as clerestory windows, and there they are. But eventually as I was designing, I was like, how cool would that be if that was a body of water? And so what's the function of that body of water? Well, you guys are familiar with what a chill beam is. It's basically a piece of equipment that goes on the ceiling, and as hot air rises, that chill beam is a cold element, and it cools that hot air so that it creates this effect of hot and cold, and then the hot air gets cool and it goes back down and the space remains cooler. It's an active way of keeping this space cold, right? And so the idea would be that this would work that way, except obviously this is getting a lot of heat throughout the day, and so it would get really hot and it would actually do the opposite effect. And so ideally you would want to cover this and not have these openings here, and instead you would want to have it very well insulated. The reason I left it open was because I decided that it would be part of the language of the design, and also I figured that if this was to be the solution, I'd have some sort of shading over this, so possibly more trees or something up here that would shade the water and keep everything else around it insulated, and this would also serve as a rainwater catch. So even though putting this element here would be a headache structurally speaking, because we'd have to support this, and I have an idea of how I would do that, but of course that's a conversation for a structural engineer. And even though it brings in more problems than it solves anything, right? It does look cool, and it's a cool idea. And as I always mention, I like my designs, these exercises that I do, to be fun and to be creative and to really allow me to try things that I probably wouldn't in real life. And so that's why that body of water is staying. So just put all the problems aside. I know that it has a lot of problems doing something like this, and doing something like this would be very, very expensive, and it'd be hard to justify. But if we were to have a space that looks like this, you can just imagine how amazing that would be. So you're in your home, there's this body of water above you, and you can look into the sky. Not only that, but also these shadows would be constantly animated because of the water and the way that the water moves and the reflections bouncing off of the water. it would almost feel like you're underwater. And so that's the reason why I kept it. So I wanted to show you guys what concrete looks like. It's not bad, but you know, facades like this, you can see that it is cool. I'm not gonna lie, it is really cool, but it's just not the material for this project. And I hope this isn't too distracting. This is a second type of concrete. It's more of a smooth concrete. Actually, it's called soft concrete. Definitely smoother, and it does look nicer. What I like about it is that it blends in with the rocks. I think that's a good choice. I think this concrete is a good choice, so it's a good runner-up. And finally, we're gonna make it to wood here. And here's this running person that I don't think you could notice her in the rendering too well, so I decided to point her out. But she'll be in there. She'll be in one of the renderings. You can see the wood. You really can't ever go wrong with wood. It just, especially in a setting like this. Not the right wood, this one, but we're getting close. I think wood is going to be our winner for this project. To tell you the truth, I know I can make wood work, but I'm just not happy with it. I had the panels before. I now made it like one solid piece of wood because I had designed these reveals already into the building. And so when I add the panels, it just looks kind of cheesy around this area. So I decided to make it a single panel. It doesn't look bad. I think this part here looks great. And I think these look okay, but I don't know that wood is gonna be the one, guys. I think we're gonna go back to concrete. All right, so I've decided to circle all the way around and end up where I first started, which is fine because I like to try different things out. But I've decided to keep this material here, which is a polished concrete with it's a different color aggregate to make it look this color, but it is concrete. And so now let's render these images, see what it looks like. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and let me know what you guys think. Tell me what you guys liked, tell me what you guys didn't like. It's okay to share your opinions. Actually, I like to see what you guys think about these designs and these material choices. Is there anything else that you would suggest that I should have done, or something you wish I wouldn't have done? Let me know down in the comments. I'm Mooch, and this is Pigeonhead Architecture.